There is a very strange paradox in this life. Many people are older, but not richer. They have more years of experience, more collisions, more lessons. But if you look at their lives, you will see something very familiar. They still have to work just as much as before, still worry just as much as before, and still depend on every dollar of income in the same way they have for many years. Not because they are lazy, not because they lack opportunities, and certainly not because they are less intelligent. Many of them are among the hardest working people you know. So what happened? Interestingly, the problem is not that they do not know how to invest. The problem is that they no longer see money the same way. When people are young, they are willing to try, willing to fail, willing to start over from scratch. But as they grow up, something very quietly appears. We begin to love stability. Not because stability is good, but because instability becomes scarier. You start to have more to lose. Reputation, family, your own image. And then, instead of asking, how can money work for me? You start asking, how can I avoid making mistakes? That question sounds very reasonable, but it is precisely that question that has closed the door to investing for many adults. They do not openly refuse to invest. They just delay. I am not familiar with it yet. I am not really talented at these things. I will do it when I am more certain. Those statements are not excuses. They are signs of a very deep internal shift, from someone willing to learn to someone who only wants to maintain the status quo. And the saddest part is, no one tells them that not investing is also a decision. A very quiet decision, not loud, no immediate risk, but it has a very clear cost later on. In this video, I do not want to teach you how to invest. I want to tell you why so many adults never become investors, even though they absolutely could, not because they lack money, but because they have unintentionally chosen safety in exchange for freedom. And at the end of this video, I will ask you a question, not for you to answer me, but for you to answer yourself, because that answer will determine whether you are working for time or letting time work for you. There is a very common misunderstanding that I have encountered again and again over many years, not only among young people, but among many who have already passed the midpoint of their lives. They think investing is something for people who have a lot of money, that before thinking about investing, you must have surplus. You must be stable first. You must have everything else in life settled first. And because of that, investing is always pushed to a very vague point in the future. Later, when conditions are right, when everything is more certain. It sounds very reasonable, but if you pay close attention, you will notice something very strange. That later moment almost never arrives. Not because life is too bad, but because life always has new reasons for you to delay. There is always a bill that needs to be paid first. There is always a responsibility that must be prioritized first. There is always a risk that makes you tell yourself, it is not time yet. And so, investing gradually becomes a foreign concept, not because you oppose it, but because you never give it a place in the present. The misunderstanding lies here. Investing does not begin with money. It begins with how you see money. When you think investing is for people who have extra, you are unintentionally telling yourself, my present is not valuable enough to think about the future. And that is a very dangerous belief. Because if you wait until everything is perfect, you will wait forever. There is no stage in life where people do not have to face instability. It is just that when you are young, instability comes from lack of experience. When you are an adult, instability comes from having too much to lose. And that very thing makes adults less willing to relearn from the beginning. I have met many people who told me, I am not familiar with these things. I do not have a talent for investing. I was never taught about money. Those statements sound very humble, but hidden behind them is a very real fear, a fear that seems naive. The fear of being exposed as not knowing. When you are young, not knowing is completely normal. You are allowed to fail. You are allowed to ask. You are allowed to try. But when you are an adult, admitting, I do not know, becomes much harder. You are used to being the experienced one, the seasoned one, the trusted one, and so you begin to avoid areas that make you feel like you are back at the starting line. Investing is one of them. Not because it is too complicated, but because it forces you to accept a role you are no longer used to, the role of a learner. The second misunderstanding is thinking that investing is a financial action. In reality, investing is a psychological action. It requires you to believe in the future when the present still has many unfinished things. It requires you to make decisions whose results do not appear immediately. And this goes against the way adults have learned to live. When you work, you are used to work, get paid, effort, get recognized. You are used to quick feedback, and investing does not give you that. It is silent, it is slow, and for a long time, it makes you doubt yourself. Many people do not fail at investing because they do it wrong. They fail because they cannot endure the initial silent phase. And when you are used to every effort having visible results, that silence becomes a dangerous signal. You start to ask yourself, am I doing something meaningless? Or am I being reckless? Those questions lead many adults back to the familiar path. Not because that path is better, but because it makes them less anxious. The third misunderstanding is thinking that investing is about knowledge. That if you study enough, read enough, understand enough, you will start. But in reality, it is the opposite. Many people keep learning, but never invest. They use learning as a safe shelter. There, they do not have to face real risk. They can say, I am researching, I am learning more. And so, year after year, they remain on the sidelines, not because they lack intelligence, but because they are waiting for a feeling that investing never gives you. The feeling of absolute certainty, but that certainty does not exist. Not in investing, and not in life. If you wait until everything is completely clear, you will only act when the opportunity is already past. Adults often underestimate the value of starting before things are perfect. They forget that many of the things they do well today all began in days when they did them very badly. But because investing is tied to money, and money is tied to safety, the fear of making mistakes becomes much greater. And then a very dangerous belief forms. Investing is for other people, not for me. That belief does not hurt you immediately. It just quietly shapes how you live with time. If you do not invest, you are forced to trade time for money for longer, not because you are incompetent, but because you do not give money the chance to work with you. And this becomes clearer as you grow older. When your energy is no longer the same, when you no longer want to run fast, but still have to run. The biggest misunderstanding, perhaps, is thinking that investing is something you can start at any time. The truth is, every year you delay. You are choosing a very specific path. You are choosing to depend more on your future self. You are choosing to work longer for the same sense of safety. No one calls that a decision, but it is a decision. And what matters is not whether you start investing today or not, What matters is whether you change the way you see investing from something for people who have extra to a way of living, from a financial action to an inner choice. When you begin to see investing that way, everything changes. You no longer ask, do I have enough money yet? You begin to ask, do I have enough courage to learn again from the beginning? And it is at that question that the paths begin to diverge. There is a very paradoxical thing that the older we get, the harder it becomes to admit. Experience does not automatically make people wiser about money. Very often, it only makes old habits more rigid. I have met people who have worked for 20 or 30 years. They understand their profession. They understand people. They understand life. But when it comes to money, they still react the same way they did on their first day of work. Not because they cannot learn, but because they have grown accustomed to a way of living, and that way of living has never required them to change. Habits have a very special kind of power. They do not need you to believe in them. They only need you to repeat them long enough. Every month, you work, you get paid, you pay your expenses, and you tell yourself, I'm still okay. That feeling of still okay is what keeps many people in the same place for years. Not painful enough to force change, not abundant enough to feel secure, just enough to continue. And time, instead of making you more alert, quietly legitimizes what you are doing. I lived like this last year too. I've always been fine. What's the problem? Those statements are not lies. They are simply traces of a habit that has been protected by time. When a habit exists long enough without causing an immediate disaster, the brain categorizes it as safe. And once it is labeled safe, it becomes very hard to question it. Adults often believe that experience helps them avoid mistakes. But what few people say is this: experience also helps them avoid opportunities. Not because opportunities disappear, but because opportunities require you to break a familiar rhythm. And breaking habits for adults is far more difficult than it is for the young. When you are young, you do not have much to protect. You have not yet tied your identity to a specific lifestyle. But as you grow older, you do not just live. You live inside an image. The image of someone stable, someone responsible, someone who doesn't take risks. And so, every financial decision you make has to pass through a very tight filter. Does this make me look immature? What will other people think? Am I doing something too unconventional? Those questions do not appear when you are young. They only appear once you are used to being seen in a certain way. Old habits, at this point, are no longer just habits of spending or saving. They are habits of protecting your own image. And this is where experience begins to backfire. Experience teaches you what can go wrong. It gives you a list of risks, but it does not give you the answer to what you should do next. Many adults possess a very large store of knowledge about what should not be done, but they lack one very important thing: the willingness to do something they have never done before. And investing, at its core, is a journey of first times. The first time of uncertainty, the first time of lacking confidence, the first time of not knowing whether you are right or wrong. Those feelings run completely counter to how adults want to see themselves. They want to feel knowledgeable, in control, experienced enough not to be surprised. But investing does not give you that feeling, at least not in the beginning. And so many people choose the safer route, doing what they have done well for many years. They continue trading time for money, continue relying on familiar skills, continue living in a rhythm they can control, not because that rhythm is ideal, but because it is familiar. Familiarity creates a very false sense of security. It makes you believe that as long as you keep going like this, nothing will collapse. But what habits do not tell you is this: not collapsing does not mean moving forward. Many people never face a major crisis. They simply live a life of constantly holding themselves together at just enough, and they call that normal. Old habits are so powerful that they can make you confuse stability with stagnation. You do not see danger because nothing is on fire. But you also do not see progress because nothing is being built. Experience, in this case, does not open new doors. It only helps you shut old doors more tightly. Every time you say, "I understand," but very often that is not understanding. That is habit speaking for you. Every time you think, "I don't need to change that much," it may not be reason. It may be familiarity protecting itself. And this is very hard to recognize from the inside, because habits do not appear as enemies. They appear as old friends. They remind you of the times you survived hardship. They tell you, "You've managed to live this way so far," but they do not tell you the cost of not changing. That cost does not arrive in a single day. It arrives very slowly, very steadily. It comes in the form of working years that stretch longer than expected, choices that grow narrower and narrower, nameless worries when you think about the future. Adults are often very good at enduring. They are used to gritting their teeth and moving forward. And that very trait makes them overlook very small signals that it is time to change their pace of life. Investing at the deepest level is not about money. It is the act of daring to admit that the way I have lived up to now may not be enough for the road ahead. And admitting that for adults is far more difficult than learning a new skill, because it touches identity, touches self-respect, touches the image you have built for so long. But if you do not dare to question your own habits, experience will not help you go further. It will only help you walk very steadily on an old path. And it is precisely here that the path of the investor begins to diverge. Not because they are smarter, but because they dare to do something very difficult, to doubt what they have grown accustomed to. There is one word that the older we get, we hear more and more often: stability. It sounds pleasant, very mature, very responsible. Stability feels like a shelter. It promises you a sense of safety, the feeling that everything is under control. And I understand why adults love stability so much. When you have gone through enough turbulence, when you have worried about money, been afraid of the future, stability becomes the thing you want to hold on to most. But there is something very few people say out loud. Stability, if it comes too early, can become the most dangerous trap in your financial life. At first, stability does not seem bad at all. You have a steady job. The income is not very high, but enough to live on. Life is not abundant, but it is not lacking either. And you tell yourself, "At least I don't have to worry." That sentence sounds very reasonable. But if you listen more closely, you will realize it hides a very big trade-off. You are trading growth potential for peace of mind in the present. And this trade-off does not hurt right away. It is like standing in a warm room. Outside, there is wind, there is rain, there is risk. Inside the room feels much more comfortable. But if you stay there too long, you will forget how far you could have gone. Many adults do not refuse to invest because they are lazy. They refuse because they do not want to disrupt their current state of stability. They do not want new volatility. They do not want to relearn. They do not want that sense of uncertainty to return. And so they choose the safest option, keeping everything exactly as it is. The problem is, the world does not stand still. The cost of living changes, time passes, strength is not what it used to be. But stability makes you forget that. It lulls you to sleep with the feeling, today is still okay. And then, one day, you realize you have been in that room for too long. Not because the door was locked, but because you no longer thought about opening it. Stability becomes an identity. You start seeing yourself as someone who doesn't like risk, who isn't suited for new things, who just needs things to be like this. Those labels start out as self-soothing, but gradually they become how you define yourself. And once an identity is formed, every decision afterward has to align with it. You no longer ask, will this help me go further? You ask, will this disrupt my stability? That is where the difference lies. Stability is not bad, but if stability is the highest priority, growth will always be pushed to the very end. And investing, at its deepest level, is growth. Not just financial growth, but personal growth. It requires you to accept uncertainty, accept relearning, accept that you are not good yet. Those things run completely counter to the mindset of someone accustomed to stability. Adults often say they do not want to take risks, but very few people realize that not taking risks is also a kind of risk. The risk of keeping everything the same while the world around you changes. The risk of reaching an age where you no longer have many choices. Stability gives you the feeling that you are in control of your life. But the truth is, it only controls the present. It does not protect you from the future. When you rely entirely on stability, you are betting that tomorrow will be like today. Next year will be like this year. But life rarely keeps that promise. Many people only realize the cost of stability when they no longer have enough time to start over. When they begin to feel more tired, slower, less flexible. And at that point, investing suddenly becomes something too distant. Not because it is harder than before, but because they have stayed still for too long. There is a very paradoxical thing. Stability is chosen to reduce anxiety, but in the long run, it creates a different kind of anxiety. The anxiety of, what happens if I stop? What happens if I can no longer do what I used to do? People who do not invest often have to work longer, not because they want to, but because they have nothing to replace it. And that is not failure. It is simply a consequence. The consequence of putting stability above growth for too many years. If you are listening to this and feel a slight sting, I do not want you to blame yourself. Many people are taught that stability is the destination, that once you are okay, you should hold on to it. But very few people tell you that. Stability should only be a foundation, not a final stop. A foundation for you to stand firmly while building something bigger, not for you to stand still forever. When you use stability as a foundation, you do not destroy it. You just do not let it decide everything. You allow yourself to accept a little discomfort in exchange for growth potential. And that is when the investment mindset begins to appear. Not loudly, not in a rush, just a very small shift in priorities. From asking, how do I avoid losing? To asking, how do I grow? And when that question changes, the path changes with it. There is a very real thing that the older we get, the less we talk about. Not because it does not exist, but because it is too close. When you are young, the biggest fear is often having nothing. No money, no position, no clear direction. But when you become an adult, the fear is no longer about lacking. The biggest fear now is losing. You have a family. You have responsibilities. You have people who depend on you, whether they say it out loud or not. And that completely changes how you see risk. Risk is no longer exciting. It becomes a threat. Not because you are weaker, but because you are carrying more on your shoulders. Every financial decision now does not just affect you, it affects the meals in your home, the sleep of the person beside you, the sense of safety of those who trust you. And so many adults choose the safest path possible, not because they have no dreams, but because they no longer allow themselves to pay the price for those dreams. I have heard many people say, if it were just me, I would have tried. That sentence contains a lot of love, but it also contains a lot of fear. Because when you are no longer alone, every mistake feels unacceptable. You begin to see the world through the lens of responsibility. And responsibility, if not understood correctly, can become a very tight lock. You do not dare to step outside what is familiar. You do not dare to relearn from the beginning. You do not dare to put yourself in the position of someone who does not know, not because you are arrogant, but because you are afraid of disappointing others. There is a very deep fear that adults rarely name, a fear that seems very reasonable, the fear of losing money. But beneath it is a much bigger fear, the fear of losing image, the image of someone reliable, the pillar, the person who always knows what they're doing. Investing, especially in the early stages, forces you to accept a very uncomfortable truth. You can be wrong, and others can see it. This, for adults, is far harder than being tired from working a few more years. Working more years is exhausting, but being wrong in front of others is painful. And so many people choose familiar pain over new pain. They choose to keep working hard, keep maintaining their current rhythm of life, keep telling themselves, at least I'm not taking risks. But there is a very quiet truth that few people face. Every year you do not invest, you are not just staying safe. You are placing more burden on your future self. Not immediately, but certainly. You are telling a version of yourself, a few years from now, you'll have to try a little harder. And a few years later, that version tells the next version the same thing. And so the burden is passed along. Adults are often very good at enduring. They are used to holding things in, used to not complaining. And that very habit makes them underestimate the long-term cost of not changing. They think they are just choosing safe. But in reality, they are choosing to postpone risk to a time when they are weaker. There is a very difficult moment that many adults have experienced. The moment they realize that if they stop, everything stops with them. There is no cushion, no protective layer. And that moment does not come from one big wrong decision. It comes from many small decisions that were never made. Not investing is not doing nothing. It is a series of choices to keep things the same. Keeping the same job, keeping the same lifestyle, keeping the same way of trading time for money. For a long time, that way of living seems reasonable. But over the years, it begins to create a very different kind of pressure. The pressure of having fewer and fewer options. Investors are not people who are not afraid of losing. They are afraid too. The difference is, they choose to face that fear earlier. They accept uncertainty when they still have enough energy to learn, enough time to fix things, enough flexibility to change. People who do not invest often choose to avoid that fear for as long as possible. And then, when the fear returns, it is much bigger, because by then, there is less time, energy is different, and pressure has piled up. There is one painful thing I have heard from people older than me. I wish I had started earlier. They are not talking about money. They are talking about choice. The choice to learn, the choice to try, the choice to be wrong when the cost was still small. The fear of losing more causes many adults to close the door to investing even when they understand very clearly what they are doing, not because they are not smart, but because they are too responsible, and responsibility, if not balanced with vision, can keep you standing still while you think you are protecting everything. If you are listening to this and feel something very familiar, I do not want you to blame yourself. This fear is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign that you have gone far enough to have something worth protecting. The problem is not eliminating fear. The problem is not letting fear decide for you. Because if every decision you make is driven only by avoiding short-term loss, you will lose something much bigger in the long run. You will lose the ability to let money work with you. And when that happens, you do not just lose money, you lose time. The one thing no one can ever earn back. There's a sentence I have heard repeated by many adults. I'll invest when everything is more certain. It sounds very reasonable, very cautious, very responsible. But if you stop and look more deeply, you will see something very frightening. That sentence has never had a clear ending point. When is more certain? When income is higher, when life is more stable, when there is no more risk. There is no such moment, because life does not operate in a state of absolute safety. It is always moving, always changing, always carrying things. You cannot predict in advance. Adults understand this, and precisely because they understand, they want to wait even more. They believe that waiting a little longer will help them avoid mistakes. But what they do not realize is this: waiting is also an action, a very passive action, but one with very clear consequences. Every year you wait, you are not standing still. You are moving in a very specific direction. That direction is quiet. There is no upheaval, but it does one thing very consistently. It takes your time away. Time does not wait for certainty. Time just flows. And while you wait for a perfect signal, it keeps moving forward, leaving you with no choices. There's a very common confusion. Many people think they fail at investing because they act too early. But in reality, many people fail because they never act at all. They spend their entire life preparing knowledge, preparing mentally, preparing everything except action. And that preparation becomes a very subtle excuse. An excuse that makes you feel like you are doing the right thing, when in fact, you are only postponing fear. Because if you act, you must face the possibility of being wrong. If you wait, you can still believe that. At least I haven't been wrong yet. Adults are often not afraid of risk. They are afraid of being wrong. Wrong in a decision they have carefully considered. Wrong in the eyes of people who trust them. Wrong against the image they have built over many years. And so waiting becomes a shelter, a place where no one judges you, where no one asks you to take responsibility for an outcome that has not happened. But waiting also has a cost. It is just not listed clearly on a bill. That cost is this: you must continue trading time for money. You must continue working under the same level of pressure. You have nothing to replace it. And the longer you wait, the higher that cost becomes. Because as you get older, the remaining time to fix mistakes gets shorter. Many people say they do not invest because they do not want to lose money. But the truth is, they are losing something more valuable than money. They are losing time that could work for them. Time is the only thing that investing needs, but money cannot buy. You can earn more money. You can learn more knowledge. But you cannot go back 5 years to start earlier. And every time you say, when things are more certain, you are telling time, go ahead, I'll catch up. But time does not wait for anyone to catch up. There is a very specific moment that many adults have experienced. The moment they realize that everything in their life depends on a single source, themselves. If they are tired, everything slows down. If they stop, everything stops with them. That moment does not come from a major event. It comes very quietly. One morning you wake up and feel more tired than usual. One time you think about the future and realize you no longer have many options. And at that point, investing suddenly becomes something deeply regretful. Not because you did not know about it, but because you waited too long. Investors are not people who wait until everything is certain. They're people who understand that certainty does not exist. They do not invest because they are sure they are right. They invest because they understand that doing nothing is also a choice. And in many cases, it is the riskiest choice of all. When you do not invest, you are betting that your health will always be enough. Your energy will always remain. Your job will always be stable. That is a very big gamble. But because it has no clear expiration date, very few people call it a risk. They just call it life. Waiting until things are certain is a very subtle way to avoid facing your own uncertainty. But there is no path that leads to freedom without passing through the gray zone. There is no future built only on the safety of the present. And here, I want you to look directly at one thing. If you have not invested yet, it may not be because you do not know how, but because you are waiting for a feeling that will never come, the feeling of absolute certainty. If you keep waiting for that feeling, you will wait until time is no longer on your side. And that is the greatest risk of all. At some point, after everything we have just gone through, I want you to stop, not to listen more, not to remember another idea, just to stop. Because there are questions that if you do not ask yourself, no one else can answer for you. Many people say they do not invest because they cannot. But the longer I observe, the more I realize that many people do not invest, not because they cannot, but because they do not want to relearn from the beginning. They do not want to return to the feeling of being new. They do not want to admit that they do not yet understand. They do not want to put themselves in a position where they could be wrong. And this is very human. When you have gone far enough in one field, earned other people's trust, been seen as someone experienced, going back to the starting line in another field is very hard to swallow. It does not attack your knowledge. It attacks your ego. You are not as afraid of losing money as you think. You are afraid of losing the image you have built over many years. And so you choose the psychologically safer option, not stepping in. You tell yourself, it's not for me. I'm not familiar with it. I'll let someone else do it. But if you are a little more honest, perhaps the real question is, do you not invest because you cannot, or because you do not want to become a learner again from the beginning? This question is not meant to blame you. It is meant to clarify something. No one is born an investor, just as no one is born good at the job. They do very well today. Everything begins with an awkward phase, clumsy, uncertain. The difference is this. Some people accept that phase and some people do not. People who do not invest are often very good in their familiar zone, but that very competence makes it hard for them to expand into a new zone. They do not lack ability. They lack the willingness to be temporarily not good. And the cost of that does not show up immediately. It shows up as time passes, when you realize you still have to work very hard just to maintain the status quo. When you begin to feel that you are working for time instead of letting time work for you, This question does not require you to invest tomorrow. It only asks you to be more honest about your reason. Because from the moment you look directly at that reason, it no longer fully controls you. And that is the beginning of freedom. If you have stayed with me all the way to this point, I want you to remember one very important thing. This video is not meant to turn you into an investor. It is meant to help you see clearly why so many adults never become investors. Not because they lack money, not because they lack intelligence, but because they have chosen psychological safety today in exchange for dependence tomorrow. Not investing is also a decision, whether you name it or not, and time will always respect that decision. It will work for you or force you to work for it. There is no neutral option. I don't know what stage you are at. Maybe you're not ready yet. Maybe you still have many very real worries. That doesn't make you weak. It only means you have something to protect. But don't let protecting the present cause you to forget the future. There is a quote I think is very fitting right now. Success is not something you pursue, but something you attract by the person you become. You don't need to become someone else immediately. You only need to become someone who dares to learn again when you know the old path may no longer take you further. If, in this video, there was a moment when you saw yourself in it, pause for a moment. And if you want, leave it in the comments. Not to tell me, but to remind yourself, I listened, I understood, and I will think differently. If conversations like this help you see life more clearly, stay with me. We're not talking about getting rich fast. We're talking about becoming a person solid enough for time to be on your side. At some point, after everything we've talked about, I want you to pause for a moment, not to listen more, not to nod in agreement, but to truly be alone with yourself, because there is one question that if you don't ask yourself, no one else can answer for you. Many adults never become investors, not because they don't understand, but because they have never paused long enough to face this question. The question is not about money. It's not about knowledge. It's not about opportunity. It's about you. Do you not invest because you can't or because you don't want to start over from the beginning? They sound similar, but those two answers lead to two completely different lives. If you can't, that's an objective limitation. You can look for another way. You can adjust your pace of life. You can choose a more suitable path. But if you don't want to, the issue isn't circumstances. It's internal. And this is the part many adults don't want to touch. Starting over, when you've already come a long way, is very hard. Not because you're not smart enough, but because you're used to being the one who knows. You're used to being asked for advice, trusted, seen as experienced. Investing in its early stages strips all of that away. It puts you in the position of a beginner, someone who can be wrong, someone who doesn't fully understand yet, someone who has to relearn concepts that at this age you shouldn't still be fuzzy about. That feeling is deeply uncomfortable. Not everyone is ready to feel clumsy after years of living as a steady, competent adult. And so many people choose a smarter sounding option. They don't say, I'm afraid. They say, I'm busy. They don't say, I'm uncomfortable relearning. They say, I'm not talented at this. They don't say, I don't want to step into the unknown. They say later. Those statements are not lies. They are shields. Shields that help you protect your self-image. Because if you admit that you don't want to start over, you'll have to face an even deeper question. What am I actually afraid of? Afraid of losing money or afraid of losing status? Afraid of risk or afraid of no longer being the one in control? Many adults can endure exhaustion, can endure pressure, can endure long years of work, but they cannot endure the feeling of not being good at something. And investing at its deepest level is the greatest test of the ego. It doesn't ask how much money you make. It asks whether you are humble enough to learn again from the beginning. There is something very interesting I've observed. Adults who don't invest are often not lacking ability. On the contrary, they're usually very good at what they're already familiar with. And precisely because they're good, they're even less willing to leave that familiar zone. They don't want to become beginners in a game whose rules they don't yet understand. They like the feeling of confidence in what they already know, but life doesn't care what feeling you prefer. It only responds to the choices you repeat long enough. If you choose to stay where you're good, life will give you a very stable path, but it will also set a very clear limit. The limit that you can only go so far within what you're already familiar with. Investing asks you to step outside that boundary. Not a leap, just a small step out of a role you've held for a long time. And that small step for adults is the hardest one, because it doesn't require physical effort. It requires lowering your ego. No one sees this from the outside, but inside, it's a very real tug of war. One part of you says, I've come this far, why should I start over? Another part whispers, if I don't start, I'll have to keep straining like this forever. And right at that intersection, many people stop. Not because they choose wrong, but because they don't choose at all. They let time choose for them. And time always chooses the easiest path in the short term. That path doesn't hurt immediately. It just makes your life longer in fatigue. This awakening question doesn't require you to become an investor right away. It only asks you to be more honest with yourself. If you don't invest because you can't, accept that and find another way to avoid being completely dependent on time. But if you don't invest simply because you don't want to start over, look directly at that. Not to blame yourself, but to understand yourself. Because if you don't name the real problem, you'll never solve it. Many adults go through their entire lives without ever answering this question. They just keep living, keep working, and hope things will be okay. But hope is not a strategy. Strategy begins with the right question. And that question, no one can ask for you. Do you not invest because you can't or because you don't want to learn again from the beginning? If you're brave enough to answer that question honestly, whatever the answer is, you've already taken a very big step forward, not financially, but in real maturity. And from that point on, your decisions will no longer be completely unconscious. You may still choose not to invest, but it will be a conscious choice. And sometimes that alone is enough to change the trajectory of an entire life. If you've stayed with me this far, I want you to understand one thing very clearly. This conversation was never really about investing. Investing is just the surface. What lies beneath it is how you face time and how you face yourself. Many adults never become investors, not because they lack money, not because they lack intelligence. They lack something very hard to name, the willingness to start again from an uncertain position. And that doesn't make them failures. It just makes their lives heavier as the years go by. Because when you don't give money the chance to work with you, you're forced to carry everything yourself, with time, with energy, with working years that stretch far longer than you ever imagined. Not investing is not wrong, but not being aware of the cost of not investing is what makes so many people pay late. Maybe today you're not ready to start. Maybe your circumstances don't allow you to do more yet, and that's okay. What matters more is this: You know what you're choosing. You no longer say, I'm not doing it because I don't know. You say, I'm not doing it yet because I'm not ready. Those two sentences sound similar, but only one of them belongs to someone who is awake. If there's one thing I want you to carry with you after this video, it's not a strategy. It's a very simple awareness. Not investing is also a decision. And time will respond to that decision, whether you name it or not. There's a quote I think fits perfectly to close this conversation. Success is not something you pursue, but something you attract by the person you become. You don't need to become an investor today, but you do need to become someone who doesn't let time decide for them. Someone willing to look directly at their own choices. Someone who understands that stability should only be a foundation, not a place to stop forever. If there was a moment in this video where you saw yourself, pause for a moment. And if you want, leave a in the comments. Not to tell me, but to remind yourself, I listened and I'm thinking. If conversations like this help you see your life more clearly, stay with us. Not to get rich fast, but to become someone solid enough that money no longer controls you. And before you leave, I want to leave you with a question that may stay with you for a long time. Do you not invest because you can't, or because you don't want to start over from the beginning? Thank you for spending your time here. We'll keep talking in future videos, in very real moments.